Managerial merry-go-round in Gaelic football is a little bit crazy. It's a little bit mad. And every year in Gaelic football, we get some mental appointments when it comes to Gaelic football managers. I mean, I remember when Mickey Hart, not long after looking like he retired from managing Tyrone, was then all of a sudden appointed manager of Louth. And it seemed a little bit crazy and mental that Mickey Hart was then going to manage a Division 4 team. Look, it ended up doing pretty well. And Ger Brennan, who was the next man in line for Louth, very much kicked them on even further. But we've seen some mental appointments. I mean, Shane Curran last year going to Carlow, and Davy Burke went to Roscommon. That was a little bit of a surprise after Kieran Donaghy had been incredibly touted as potentially being the Roscommon football manager. You get some crazy sort of predictions, takes. You get some sort of mental news articles that come out with managers. I mean, Philly McMahon recently going to manage the Naas footballers is a little bit mental as well, isn't it? So you've got some crazy managerial appointments that tend to happen every year. Even Mickey Hart last year going to Offaly. And who knows, could Dessie Farrell potentially be managing the Mayo footballers next year? Could we see Jason Sherlock maybe go down the lower leagues and potentially manage somewhere like a Waterford or something like that? That'd be a little bit crazy. Maybe Andy Moran might go back to his native county in Roscommon. That was a little bit low, I won't lie. That was a bit too far. But look, welcome back to Gaelic Games Fan TV. My name is Aaron, and we are going to be predicting every managerial appointment in Gaelic football going into 2026. That's right, we're going to be going through every county. Now, obviously, a lot of managers will stay with certain counties for next season. It's not like every county has to change their manager. That would be a little bit crazy. But we are going to be predicting whether the manager stays. And if he is potentially going to leave, we're going to be discussing the potential replacement. Because right now, 8 counties are on the lookout for Gaelic football managers. And we still have All-Ireland semi-finals to play. Like, there's still a good couple of games left in the All-Ireland series. And in my opinion, I think we could be up to maybe 10-15 this year. I think there's going to be a lot of managerial changes in Gaelic football when it comes around later in the summer, when it gets to like August or something like that. And look, will we actually see Dessie Farrell go and manage Mayo? No, we won't see that, lads. I mean, that's a crazy one. I mean, bizarrely enough, he is 16-1 to manage the Louth footballers, which maybe Louth could continue a tradition of appointing Dublin managers. And look, would we see, someone like a Tony McEntee maybe go and manage Wicklow if McConville left? Who knows? It could happen. But look, we're going to be predicting all the managerial appointments, all the managerial changes. We're going to be going through each county. We're going to be focusing in on, of course, the counties who, as we know right now, do not have a manager going into 2026. And we're going to be predicting who I think they will appoint. But I am going to be predicting as well some potential managerial shifts and changes and everything else. So without further ado, if you could hit the like button and subscribe, that would be very much appreciated. And let's go in alphabetical order, starting off with Antrim, finishing up with Wicklow. Let's go. So as we know, Andy McEntee has left his role as the Antrim senior football manager. Probably not of a surprise after the last 2 years, the relegation and everything else. It probably was expected. So Antrim are one of the counties that are on the lookout as of right now for a manager. Who knows, maybe by the time this video has come out, they've appointed someone, although I would highly doubt it this early on. In terms of some potential candidates, it's an interesting one. I think the standout for me is Ronan Devlin. Ronan Devlin won 3 county titles with Cargan in a row, actually, between 2018 to 2020. But there are some other interesting potential shouts. They could be, could potentially end up with another McEntee and Tony McEntee, not a relation of Andy or anything like that, but an Armagh man. He did a very good job with Sligo. Would Tony McEntee, though, want to take what would look like a bit of a step down? Ronan Devlin, I think, would be the favourite. You are looking at the likes of Kevin Madden, maybe John McKeever could be in the mix. I've seen Pete McGrath's name even being touted around at the moment as well, because he's currently managing Gallen, and he's done quite a good job with them over there. But I think it's, Pete McGrath, legendary manager, of course, but I'd be very surprised to see him come back into inter-county football management anytime soon. So I'm going to say that Ronan Devlin takes the reins as Antrim manager going into 2026. I think Kieran McGeeney stays here, to be honest with you. I think this is one that we don't need to discuss in great detail. If McGeeney was to leave, and look, there is the potential for McGeeney to leave. He's the longest serving county, the longest serving manager in Gaelic football right now. He might maybe decide to step away, but I think he's got a great team. He's got great players, a phenomenal panel. He's gotten this Armagh team to the position he would have always wanted. He won an All-Ireland last year, But I think there's more in this Armagh team. I think there's an Ulster title there, maybe even a few Ulster titles, an All-Ireland, maybe even another one potentially as well. If he was to leave, I mean, there is some interesting potential candidates knocking about. We mentioned Tony McEntee. He is an Armagh man, so maybe he could potentially be knocking on the door to a tremendous job with Sligo. Oisin McConville is definitely there. There's no question about that. He's done a tremendous job with Wicklow. Could it be a little bit early for Oisin McConville, though? And maybe I think the better plan is stick with McGeady. If McConville can rise up through the ranks a little bit more, maybe go and manage someone like a Louth or a Roscommon or something like that, then maybe then McConville has earned the stripes even more to become Armagh manager. Conor Gilligan could potentially be in the shout. Kieran McKeever's in there as well, but I think Kieran McGeady stays, lads. I mean, come on. This is a kind of a hard one. I think Joe Murphy, the Carlow, the interim Carlow manager, I think he will stay. I mean, they got that big win versus Fermanagh in the in the Tailteann Cup, and what a huge win that was. And it's a hard one to know what Carlow. There's just not a lot of quality really within the county. Could they, they went a little bit left field with Shane Curran last year. Could they go a little bit left field this year? Maybe bring in someone like a Jason Sherlock. Could we see Paddy Christie maybe come back into management? And who knows? There could be another, former player out there somewhere who might take the reins here. I mean, could we imagine a Killian O'Connor or something like that going and managing Carlow? That'd be a little bit mental. But to be fair, I think Carlow probably will stick with Joe Murphy. One man I would say, though, that could potentially be in the mix is actually Kevin Byrne. He won the county title last year with Rathvilly, so he could maybe be in the mix. But I think Joe Murphy will stay. Raymond Galligan has since stepped down. And I am re-recording this part of the video as well because didn't expect this news to break and didn't expect this to actually happen. And I certainly didn't predict Raymond Galligan to leave, but he has decided to leave his post as the Cavan senior football manager. Look, in terms of replacements, looking at the odds and everything else, there's a few people who are in the conversation. The first one is Larry Riley, who's been in charge of the under-20s the last couple of years, and he's done a pretty good job. You've got Andy Moran maybe in the mix as well. He's obviously been working with Monaghan, and of course did a very good job with Leitrim. And I think Cavan would definitely be a job that I think it would be that next step up. And although, look, he is being touted as being the next Mayo manager, I honestly think Andy Moran, he needs that next step. And I think Cavan would be perfect in and around Division 2, young manager. And I think that would be a brilliant appointment personally. You've got Ed O'Hanlon, who's in the mix as well. He's done a bit of a job with the minors. James Burke has been touted about as well. He was part of Mickey Graham's management team. And Vinnie Corey seems to be getting a bit of a shout as well. Although I do think with him being a Monaghan man and a Monaghan manager, I'm just not too sure if that one will happen. Look, personally, I do think that the appointment of Andy Moran would be a brilliant one. Look, if they want to play it safe, you go with a James Burke. You go, you keep it inside the county and everything else, and you sort of keep the good, the goodness that Mickey Graham built, that Raymond Galligan was able to keep on. If you want to keep that kind of thing going, look, there is a risk with bringing in Andy Moran because it could potentially backfire. Do you know what I mean? It is a step up, I think, from Leitrim, in my opinion, managing in Division 2 next season with some of the teams that are going to be in there as well. When you think Tyrone are going to be there, Derry are going to be there, you've got Meath in there as well, Cork, a lot of very good sides, Kildare coming up. Cavan could be in a bit of relegation trouble if they don't get this appointment right. Look, in terms of prediction, though, I'm going to go that Andy Moran gets this job. Look, he's been touted about with a lot of different county jobs. And I think he did a great job, in the back room with Monaghan last year. But I think he wants to be a manager. And I'm going to say that he's the Cavan manager next year. Not to sound too boring, but I think Peter Keane stays here as well, in my opinion. Look, it's his first year in charge of Clare. He's a very experienced manager from his time with Kerry. Look, you would expect Clare maybe next year. Look, they'll be pushing on the doors for promotion. If they end up back in the All-Ireland series next year, hopefully it's true, winning a Division 3 title or something like that, and not through the draw in Munster, because I don't think it's doing Clare football any favours whatsoever. And look, with some of the more experienced players coming back into the team and getting the buy-in, I think Peter Keane will stay. Other candidates, so look, if Peter Keane, for whatever reason, was to leave Clare, I mean, maybe you could look at someone like a Michael Naylan. He was forefront the last time Clare were looking for a manager in 2024. He actually led St. Joseph's Milltown to Clare Senior Football Championship titles in 2015 and 2018. So, look, maybe he'd be in the mix. You look at Declan Downs, maybe Declan O'Keefe could be in there as well. John Evans could potentially get a show for a Kerry or for a Clare job. So, there's a few candidates there, but I think Peter Keane will stay. I think this one's a little bit more sort of like with John Cleary. It, wasn't definitive whether he was going to stay. I think he was saying in the press conference he was going to evaluate options and everything else. It's a hard one to know with Cork because Cork over the last couple of years have got some big wins and big results against big teams. But it's just been that consistency that they've never been able to find. And their team seems to chop and change from year to year. And they can never seem to find a consistent team to stick with. So it's hard to know what will actually happen with Cork. I have a sneaky feeling that he actually might step away as Cork football manager. I could be wrong, but that's just an inkling I've got. If he was to step away, it would be interesting to see who they would go with. I mean, could we see Davy Burke potentially step in as Cork football manager? Or maybe someone like a James Horan or something like that. I feel like Cork, it is an attractive job, and I feel like it could attract like a high-profile manager. And I feel like someone like a James Horan or a Stephen Rochford, or maybe even, look, I don't think Dessie Farrell will manage next year, in my opinion. And I'm going to say this now, like, I think Dessie Farrell, in my opinion, will probably take a year out or something like that. And I'm going to say that Dessie Farrell takes a year out. I'm going to say that Dessie Farrell is the man to end Na Fianna's drought when it comes to winning a Dublin Senior Football Championship. You heard it here first. But look, Cork could go a little bit more local. I mean, they could look at someone, some people who've been part of John Cleary's management team. Kevin Walsh could potentially be a shout. You could be looking at someone like a Jim O'Donoghue, maybe a James Lockery as well. A Barry Corkery could very much be in the mix. It's a hard one to know. If I had to predict it now, I'll go for something a little bit left field, and I'll say that James Horan becomes the Cork manager. Why not? Looking at Derry then, and I am re-recording this part as well because thanks, Paddy Tally, just for stepping down. It was certainly not something I expected. I mean, it was mad. Throughout the entirety of the year, I mentioned that I thought Paddy Tally would leave, and then after those group stages, I was thinking, do you know what? It feels like they've started to turn a corner a little bit. Although they didn't win a game this year, they played very, very well in those matches. But no, Paddy Tally is left, and apparently he's left off of his own accord. I mean, a bit like Raymond Galligan as well, to be fair, which bit of a shock, bit of a surprise. In fairness, maybe he's just looked at it and thought, I've managed throughout the year and haven't been able to get a win, and maybe, he feels that someone else should come in. Look, in terms of replacements, there is the big elephant in the room that is Rory Gallagher. I think it's just, you're stepping on so many eggshells there. There's a lot of moving parts to it. I think after the fuss that was created last year, look, you do have the kind of noise in the background between Gallagher and Jarlath Burns, or between Gallagher and Jarlath Burns and everything else. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but it revolves around Rory Gallagher potentially going to Naas and then not going to Naas. So look, if Derry would want this to happen, but I think there's a lot of moving parts, to be honest with you, and I'm not too sure that it does happen. Look, in terms of other appointments, Ronan Devlin, who I mentioned previously with Antrim, he could be maybe in the conversation here as he is a Derry man. It is a hard one. Like, I think Enda McGinley would be a great shout. Look, I know it's another Tyrone man. It's a third Tyrone man in a row, which is a little bit mental, but I think Enda McGinley will be a good shout. But you know what? Who I actually think will be a perfect manager for Derry, and going a little bit left field, I'm going with Stephen Rochford. I think Stephen Rochford would do a brilliant job with Derry, in my opinion. Look, maybe it is a little bit left field, and maybe it is a bit of an El commute for Rochford. I'm not too sure if he's actually living in Mayo or where he's based at the moment. Could actually be living in Galway, to be fair. But maybe, look, that would be a bit of a commute for him as a manager. But I think, look, he knows how he's managed a county before with great expectations. He's managed a county before that has the bulk of their players in their prime. And look, I know people are going to say straight away, well, Rochford didn't win anything really with Mayo. I don't think he won any kind of titles. And he didn't win the All-Ireland that Mayo were so desperate to win. But look, they were competing with one of the greatest Gaelic football teams of all time in Dublin, and they took that Dublin team as close as almost anyone has during that time period, especially in 2017. I mean, goodness me, how close that game was. 2016, obviously, as well. And I think him coming into Derry, I think he'd galvanise the players. He'd be a fresh voice. I think going down the back of another Tyrone manager would just be, I just don't really know. I think even appointing another manager from Ulster as well, I think they should maybe go towards like a Stephen Rochford. Look, some people are saying Dessie Farrell could be in the mix, and I know we've mentioned him a lot already in this video. I don't know. I couldn't see that happening, lads. But also at the same time, I don't think it would be a bad appointment. But you know what? We're going to go a little bit left field, and we're going to say that the managerial appointment for Derry is Stephen Rochford. Jim McGuinness is staying here. There's no question about it. There's no way he leaves this Donegal side. Look, maybe the only way he leaves Donegal is if Donegal got beaten by Meath and got a bit of a hiding or something like that. I mean, I don't think any of us could ever see that happening, but if that did happen, maybe through pure shame, Jim McGuinness just decides to step down, or I don't know. He was looking a little bit antsy in press conferences, and Donegal are releasing a lot of statements at the moment, so maybe Jim McGuinness is getting a bit fed up. I don't know, but look, I think he will be there next year, in my opinion. Some would say if he wins the All-Ireland, could he potentially step down, because he was actually only in charge of Donegal for 3 years the last time, and this is his second year, so maybe he wins it this year, leaves next year. It's hard to know. Look, if he was to step down, I'm not going to lie, there's not really that many candidates that could come in. You'd be looking at maybe Colin McFadden, who's been part of the McGuinness backroom team, if you want to keep that going. But then again, they did that last time with Rory Gallagher, coincidentally, and it actually didn't really work out. And they could look at Carl Lacey, who's done well with Kilcoo, and he could potentially be a candidate there. Could they look at a Declan Bonner return, or maybe even go outside the county? It's hard to know. But look, I think McGuinness stays. I think that's nailed on, surely. Another one that's nailed on here, Conor Laverty to stay. There's no doubts about that. He's staying. It's another one that's pretty nailed on. I think so. Look, the only thing I often wonder with a manager like this, if they could get tempted by another job from another county, but as we know, Conor Laverty is a down man. He's not going to go anywhere, so this is absolutely nailed on. Look, there are some potential candidates who could be in the mix. You have a Martin Clark who could be in there. Declan Morgan could potentially be in the conversation as well, and he was part of some of Down's under-20 success in recent years. I do think Kieran Meena, and actually, like, speaking of even Derry as well, Kieran Meena for me would have been the perfect replacement when Mickey Hart stepped away. But for whatever reason, Kieran Meena just doesn't seem to want the Derry job, and maybe just doesn't want to be a manager and doesn't want the spotlight. I'm not entirely sure, but like the job he did after Gallagher leaving mid-season with Derry was nothing short of remarkable. And I think Kieran Meena would be a fantastic Gaelic football manager, but for whatever reason, he just doesn't seem to want it. But I think he'd be a fantastic managerial appointment by some county this year if they could pull it off. But yeah, look, all in all, Conor Laverty is staying. Here we go then. This is the big one, isn't it? We know Dessie Farrell is leaving as Dublin manager. He will not be the Dublin manager going into 2026. So the big question is, who will be the Dublin senior football manager? And look, let's go through it. Let's run through the candidates. So we've got Ger Brennan, Declan Darcy, Mick Bohan seem to be the three leading candidates. I have seen some shouts for Stephen Cluxton potentially coming in as Dublin manager, lads. I mean, Stephen Cluxton will not be the Dublin senior football manager. I mean, the man never does interviews. I just don't think he's a manager. Do you know what I mean? He's the type of person who leads by example. That's why he's an excellent captain, because he doesn't really need to say anything, because he just does it on the pitch. But for him as a manager, I think he'd be great in the backroom team or something like that. But I don't think he will be a manager. I'd be very, very surprised if that happens, to be honest with you. Jim Gavin returning's been mentioned. Don't see that happening either. I've seen Pat Gilroy getting a mention. No, lads, I think that ship has sailed as well. I did see a bizarre show for Mickey Hart. I mean, Jesus, could you imagine Mickey Hart managing Dublin? I actually think the world would actually stop, to be honest with you. But look, going through the three candidates, Mick Bohan did very, very well with the Dublin ladies, and he has been touted as a replacement, and he's been talked about for a while. It's a hard one to judge because he had a very, very good team, Dublin ladies team, and he sort of was like the Jim Gavin essentially of the Dublin ladies footballers. So like, I think he's definitely in the conversation, but I'd love to see him manage another county maybe first or something like that, just to see how he would do. Declan Darcy's been in the conversation as well, and he was in the conversation when Dessie was going for the job. He is now working with Leinster though, and whether he wants to give up a cosy gig like that, I don't think he does. And that leaves Ger Brennan, and I think it's nailed on. Look, Ger Brennan has left his post as Louth manager, which means we're going to speak about Louth a little bit later on. But look, lads, this has to be a nailed on conclusion, surely. I mean, Ger Brennan, the job he's done at Louth is nothing short of remarkable. To win them their first Leinster title in 68 years. Look, it'll be a challenging job for Ger Brennan. I think he'll have to rebuild Dublin. It's going to take, a couple of years. There's no guarantee that this is successful as well. And look, the last three managers who've managed Dublin, and Dessie Farrell, Jim Gavin, and Pat Gilroy, have all won All-Irelands. It's definitely not a guarantee that Ger Brennan wins one, but I think he gives us the best opportunity over the next couple of years. So Ger Brennan for me, Dublin manager 2026. Here we go. Difficult one. I mean, Kieran Donnelly, I think he'll stay. I think he will as Fermanagh manager. It was a mixed year. There was some good moments. Look, they got to a Tailteann Cup semi-final, which was progress. I think ultimately it probably will be down to him whether he stays or goes. If he was to go, there's not really too many candidates I could think of. Maybe a Ryan McManaman return. Andy Moran, could he fancy a crack at a Fermanagh job maybe? Or is he holding out for something a little bit better? Could we see Jason Sherlock, his name has been brandished out with so many inter-county jobs over the last couple of years. I feel like if he doesn't get one this year, I mean, geez, the poor man. He's an absolute Dublin icon, Dublin legend. Just give him something for God's sake. And maybe him going to Fermanagh could potentially be the one there. Ronan O'Neill as well has been mentioned in the past. So maybe he could stay. But it's a hard one to judge, lads. But I think Kieran Donnelly probably will stay. Pádraig Joyce is confirmed until 2026. But it just has the makings after losing to Meath and some of the comments he's made throughout the year as well about some of the players. It does have a feeling that he could step away, but I do have a sneaky feeling maybe things go toxic next year. To be honest with you, the Galway County Board is I think they will stick with Pádraig Joyce. Look, he's earned the right to stick around, but there's a lot of players that are getting older. There's maybe younger players that need to come through. It's not a county that needs a rebuild, but I do see a rebuild coming in a couple of years. And you do wonder, if they don't get it right next year, then it could be a little bit worrying. So I think Joyce probably does stay, but I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he does go. And if he does go, who would be the answer? And that is the big, big question. I mean, could Mickey Graham, maybe, who's playing, 4D chess, becoming the Leitrim manager and then, snooping in at Galway? It's a bit like Macbeth-like kind of from Mickey Graham. But to be fair, I think he will. I couldn't see Galway actually going for him as their manager, to be honest with you. I think the candidates would maybe be John Divley. He was a long-term, selector under Joyce and maybe the man to kind of carry things on. Alan Flynn, Kevin Walsh maybe returned, could be in the conversation. But I do actually think Kevin Johnson would be a great show. He managed Cork into back-to-back titles in 2023 and 24. So maybe Kevin Johnson could get in the conversation there. But the good, there's no other outstanding candidates, and I think that's probably why you stick with Joyce. All the sort of murmurings and everything else is that Jack O'Connor is going to leave. I mean, I was listening to Pat Spillane on a podcast the other day. I think it might have been Indo Sport or something like that. But he was saying that he reckons Jack O'Connor is going to leave. And look, it does make sense. He's been around a long, long time in terms of a manager. Obviously, this is his third spell. And it feels like if he wins the All-Ireland with Kerry this year, it's the perfect goodbye. But it feels like if they get knocked out in a semi-final or even lose the final, it also feels like a good time to say goodbye as well. And look, there are some potential people knocking on the door for Kerry as well that could come in here. Eamon Fitzmaurice is the man that immediately jumps out. He won an All-Ireland with Kerry back in 2014. I think he's been managing Fossa the last couple of years. He's obviously been instrumental in bringing in the new rules as well. So you could see him come back in as the Kerry manager. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if we do and see that. There are some other potential shouts. Kieran Donaghy, I think he's going to go back to Kerry at some point. I think he will. Will it happen this year, though? Maybe he wants to stick with Armagh for a little bit longer. That's going to be interesting to see. Look, if he gets offered the job, I don't think he turns it down. But I don't know. It feels like there's probably better candidates out there, at least right now anyway. German Murphy could also be a shout as well. But you know what? I'm going to say that Eamon Fitzmaurice is the Kerry manager next year. I know it's kind of like you're going from, Jack O'Connor as a legendary Kerry manager. And then Fitzmaurice came in. He obviously had a few managers in between. And now you're back to Jack O'Connor, back to Fitzmaurice. It's a little bit kind of going back and forth. But I think he's, I think he's earned the stripes, in my opinion. Eamon Fitzmaurice, Kerry manager next year, in my opinion. I think this is another nailed on one. I think Brian Flanagan absolutely stays here. Look, there are some people potentially in the background who could be, eyeing up this job. I mean, you've got Davy Burke, who obviously is not, Roscommon manager anymore. Won an under-20 title with Kildare, is a Kildare man. Look, he will be Kildare manager at some point, but no, I think Brian Flanagan sticks around. I actually think Davy Burke probably goes into the media, does a bit of punditry, and when this job becomes available, if it does, that's when Davy Burke maybe snoops in. There are some other potential candidates. You got Cian O'Neill maybe potentially as a return. You've got Aidan O'Rourke, Emmett Bolton maybe as well. But no, I think Brian Flanagan will stay. An interesting one. I thought Justin McNulty would have stepped away after how things ended with Laois. He's obviously a very busy man with politics and everything else. But no, he did actually say it'd be very, very hard to step away. Look, maybe after he reevaluates, he will step away, but it's looking like he will stay potentially. But look, again, there's not many candidates. You'd be looking at an Alan Flynn, maybe a Paul Kelly, who was managing Tipperary recently. Maybe he could come into Laois. But I do think John Sugrue would be the man here. In my opinion, he was the former Laois manager between 2017 to 2019, so maybe they could go back there. You'd also be looking at, could Ross Munnelly, maybe step up and be a manager? You know what? Going to go a little bit left field. I think Justin McNulty leaves. Ross Munnelly is the Laois manager next year. All signs are saying that Stephen Poacher leaves. It seems to be what everyone's saying, but it hasn't yet happened. And I feel like even Leitrim fans want the news to break. If he does leave, I think the most obvious shout or the most obvious candidate here would be Barry McWeeny, who... Look, he's a selector under Stephen Poacher, but not only that, he was the Leitrim under-20 manager over the last couple of seasons and in 2025. You look at how well Leitrim have done over the last couple of years with their under-20s and some of the players that are coming through. I think he would be the man to come in there, and he's the man I think that will be Leitrim manager next year, a man to galvanise the county. Look, could they go back to Andy Moran? Could there be an outside shout maybe of someone like an Andy McEntee potentially, or a Danny Hughes, who was in line potentially to get Cavan a couple of years ago? But no, I'm going to go Barry McWeeny to become the Leitrim manager next year. I think Jimmy Lee stays. Look, Limerick are in the Tailteann Cup final, lads. I mean, he's surely going to stay, and regardless of what happens there, I think he does stay. You'd be looking at if for whatever reason Jimmy Lee did leave, who knows, maybe he wins the Tailteann Cup and decides it's a perfect kind of fond farewell. Michael Cahill could be potentially the man to come in there. He's done a bit of work, I think, under Jimmy Lee. Could you see a Billy Lee return? The swapping back and forth of the Lee brothers. That'd be interesting to see. Adrian O'Brien could maybe come in as well. He's been a performance coordinator and has a lot of involvement within different Limerick clubs. But no, lads. Jimmy Lee, I nearly said Billy there. Jimmy Lee will stay. Looking at London then. London is an interesting one. Michael Maher has been manager for a long time there. One of the longest serving managers in inter-county football as of right now. Look, you wonder, he's been there a long time. Maybe he will step away at some point. I'm going to be honest. There are very few candidates out there that I can think of because, look, it's been a long time since London have been in the search. For a manager, Paul Coggins has been mentioned a little bit from looking elsewhere. Very, very hard one. I mean, look, maybe London could go externally, but again, you'd need someone within, who's living in London. Look, there's plenty of high-profile GAA players down the years who are living in London and who've been involved with London, but whether they'd actually want to become the manager, I'm not entirely sure. But look, we're going to say that Michael Maher stays. I think Mike Solon will stay here. It was his first year last year. It didn't really make progress. Longford's a bit of a weird one. I feel like they need a Longford manager to come in. I feel like the outside managers of Mike Solon and Paddy Christie, they just haven't really worked. And both of those two have good record with underage teams, with younger teams, and it just hasn't really worked. To be honest with you, I'd be interested to see, could Frankie Dolan potentially be in with a shout to be a Longford manager? I mean, he won a county title with Abbey Lara, albeit though, there is another potential county, his own native county, who could potentially be knocking on his door and ringing his phone. I've often wondered if Mickey Graham would ever fancy a Longford managerial job after the job he did with Mullen Yachta. Could he fancy it? But then again, at the same time, he's with Galway at the moment, so probably not going to happen. Mike Solon probably stays. An interesting one. Louth are one of the teams that don't have a manager, as Jared Brennan has stepped away. The last two managerial appointments of Louth football you couldn't have predicted, both Mickey Hart and Ger Brennan, and I'm curious to know, do they go down that realm again? I think Peter Fitzpatrick has been absolutely perfect in appointing these managers for the Louth footballers. Gavin Devlin's been getting a shout. He's been the sort of second-hand man to Mickey Hart, obviously, down the years, and he's done an incredible job with the Louth Academy and everything else. So potentially he could get in could potentially be in the mix there. Although I do think Fergal Real would also be a good shout as under-20 manager. He's done a lot of the great work with the Louth under-20s. Maybe Peter Dooley could be in the mix there as well. Interesting enough, Desi Farrell is 16-1, which is an interesting one. Could you imagine Desi Farrell with the Louth footballers? There's I think even Pat Gilroy I've seen shortlisted as well. But you know what? Going to go a little bit left field here. I think Mick Bohan becomes the manager of the Louth footballers, because you know what? If Mick Bohan doesn't get the job as Dublin senior football manager, I think he'll want to go somewhere else. And why not go to Louth and carry on the tradition that's been set by Ger Brennan as being successful with Louth? So yeah, Mick Bohan to Louth. Here's another big one then. Mayo don't have a manager. Kevin McStay stepped away. And will we just talk actually about that statement that was released by Mayo GA? I mean, goodness me, like they didn't even mention the health problems that Kevin McStay had. I mean, just so out of touch, so insensitive, disingenuous. Really, really poor stuff from Mayo football there, in my opinion. And also quite harsh on Stephen Rochford as well, who I thought did a good job in those kind of two games. And for me, I think should be in the mix to return to Mayo. Although, do they want to keep chopping and changing between, going back to kind of old managers, which Mayo have so often done in the past? And another manager who is in the conversation potentially is James Horan for a third spell, which will be interesting. And look, James Horan is a great manager. Stephen Rochford's a brilliant manager as well. But I wonder, do they just need someone fresh that these players haven't worked with before? It's an interesting, it's an interesting observation. In terms of the candidates, in terms of the serious candidates, so you've got Austin O'Malley, who won an All-Ireland with Coola this year. What an incredible job that was. You've got Andy Moran as well, potentially in the mix. And the other name I've heard tout is actually Ushie McConville, who I think, to be fair, would actually do a really good job with Mayo from what he's done with Wicklow. Again, it's one of those things where things could go quite well with Mayo for a couple of years, but then if Armagh comes available, all right, lads, see you later. Do Mayo want that? I'm not sure if they do. That could maybe be an issue. Andy Moran is definitely a long-term kind of option, but I think he's always going to be there, and I feel like he maybe needs to go somewhere else first, or maybe carry on what he's doing at Monaghan potentially. I think Austin O'Malley gets it, to be honest with you, because to win in All-Ireland, I mean, lads, come on. I mean, if you win an All-Ireland of any kind as a Mayo man, you have to get in the conversation, surely. And to do it with Coola, that was an extraordinary achievement. I mean, don't get me wrong. Coola, look, it's not exactly a fairy tale. Coola are a massive club. Yes, it was their first Dublin Senior Football Championship that he did win with them. They've got serious players in Con O'Callaghan, Mick Fitzsimons, Padder Cufford Byrne. And look, Coola has some, tremendous facilities and everything else. So it's not a huge surprise that Coola have made the breakthrough. But still, to win the All-Ireland at the first attempt is quite incredible. So I think Austin O'Malley has to be in the conversation. I've heard Ray Dempsey's name getting touted out again, but no, I think, lads, Austin O'Malley, Mayo manager next year, surely. The next few counties are absolutely nailed on, so we're just going to fly through them, really. We've got Meath. Look, Robbie Brennan will stay. There's no doubt about that. I think this is the most nailed on one of all the other ones, and I think it's even disrespectful to even mention other candidates. But look, Larwall, maybe an Andy McEntee return. I did see a bizarre shout of someone saying that maybe Robbie Brennan could potentially go to Dublin. Come on, lads. I mean, it'd be like Wayne Rooney managing Liverpool. I mean, it's just never going to happen. Come on, lads. It would be absolutely insane if we did see that. Yes, he did work with Kilmacud Crokes and everything else, but he's a Meath man, and there's no way he leaves Meath. Monaghan, Gabriel Bannigan stays as well. I've no doubts about that after the work that's been done this year. You do have some other potential shouts. Andy Moran could, maybe take the senior role. You've got Enda McGinley, who I don't think would be a bad show. Could Mickey Graham sort of, ruin his reputation at another county? by taking the Monaghan job, fierce rivals of the Cavan side he once won an Ulster title with. That'd be interesting to see, but no, I think Gabriel Bannigan will stay there. Offaly, another one. I think Mickey Hart and Declan Kelly will be staying there. There's no real other outstanding candidate. I was looking at Roger Ryan, who had great success with the minors this year, but no, Hart and Declan Kelly will stay here. Roscommon. Now, this is an interesting one. As we know, we have seen the exit from Davy Burke. So, who will be the next Roscommon senior football manager? And there is a bit of a split. Like, do Roscommon want a man from their county who's going to galvanate them and everything else? And no, I'm not going to do the Andy Moran joke again, because it's probably been, you've heard it once on here before. You've probably heard it elsewhere as well. Look, Frankie Dolan would be the ideal candidate. As I said, he won a county title in Longford with Abbey Lara. Phenomenal achievement. But there is a man that I think isn't really getting mentioned. And I think that man, in my opinion, is Liam Tully. He was the man who led the Roscommon under-20s to the All-Ireland final in 2021. And he also led the Roscommon under-17s back in 2017 to an All-Ireland final. So, this is a man who knows Roscommon inside and out. He knows this age group of players as well. I think he'd be perfect, and I don't really know why he's not in the conversation. James Horan, Ushie McConville, Stephen Rochford are all been kind of branded about here a little bit as well, but it's a hard one to know. Like, what way will Roscommon go? So, you know what? I think Ushie McConville will become the Roscommon manager. I think that would be a phenomenal appointment. Yeah, let's do it. Ushie McConville to the Rossies. We know Tony McEntee has left his post as Sligo football manager. And for me, there's only one man I can think of here, and that is Paul Henry. He won the under-20 Connacht title in 2023 with Sligo. He even got them to the All-Ireland final as well. And he even won a minor Connacht title in 21 as well. So he's a man that knows Sligo football inside and out. It's an absolute no-brainer. Paul Henry will become the Sligo manager, no doubt about it. Tipperary, I think Philly Ryan stays here. I don't think there'll be a change. Or could David Power maybe, be in the conversation to return if Philly Ryan did leave for whatever reason? Do we have, we have the likes of Paul Cahill? Could they go a little bit, out around? I often wonder whether Colm Collins would maybe fancy a return to management. Could he maybe go to someone like a Tipperary? But no, I think Philly Ryan will stay. Tyrone, it's another one that we know the manager will stay. Malachy O'Rourke will stay. Look, regardless of what happens in the game versus Kerry, I think Malachy O'Rourke will stay as Tyrone manager. What I would say, though, is there is people like potentially there, a ready-made replacement, whether that be an Enda McGinley or possibly even Paul Devlin as well, who did an incredible job, who has done an incredible job with the Tyrone under-20s. And it will be interesting to see whether even Paul Devlin leaves that role, potentially goes, manages another county, or is he just going to stay there as the ready-made replacement? I think he's already said he's staying around with the under-20s as well. And who could blame him with the success that he's had there? Hard one to kind of call here, to be honest with you. Paul Shanky has left, and it's, you couldn't really call it. From doing a bit of research, Mikey Cronin has been the man who's been in the mix, so maybe we'll just go with him. I would love to see Waterford go and appoint someone sort of outside the county. It's just not really an attractive proposition, is it, if we're being honest? But I'd just love to see, I don't know, maybe a player who retired recently, like a James McCarthy or a Lee Keegan or someone like a Killian O'Connor, just to go there and just kind of test that out. I think that would be absolutely incredible. Could you imagine one of them going to Waterford football and the boost that would give Waterford football? But no, I don't think that will happen, to be honest. So no, let's go with Mikey Cronin. Westmeath, I think it's probably likely that Darren McCabe stays here. I think, to be fair, I think he will stay as Westmeath manager. It wasn't the best year for Westmeath football, but I think it probably would be a bit of a change to change it around and to chop and change things. Potentially, you could look at a Jack Cooney maybe return, who did very well. I think Anthony Cunningham, actually, to be fair, would be a man I could definitely see manage the Westmeath footballers. But no, I think Dermot McCabe will stay. Wexford, I think John Hegarty will stay here, in my opinion. I think after the progress of Wexford football getting up to Division 3, apparently did wonder maybe with losing the Division 4 final, the quarterfinals to Limerick as well in the Tailteann Cup. But no, I think John Hegarty will stick around with Wexford football. It's hard to really know what other candidates are out there. Maybe someone like a Brian Malone could maybe come in there. They could go left field and maybe kind of go outside the county. Maybe look at someone like a Paul Kelly or something like that. But no, I think you'll be looking at John Hegarty staying. And then last but not least, we have Wicklow, and Ushie McConville has announced that he is staying. And yeah, I've had to re-record this bit as well because, well, yeah, I was very, very confident that Ushie McConville was going to leave Wicklow. I mean, he's done a phenomenal job there. I thought he'd want to maybe take that next step before Armagh, but maybe he's looking at it and thinking, do you know what? I'm just going to stick here with Wicklow. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. He's obviously very heavily involved with the BBC as well. And maybe by staying with Wicklow, that will allow him to still kind of do, you know, a few bits and bobs and everything else. And maybe he's just going to wait in the wings for maybe when McGeaney does eventually decide to leave with Armagh. But look, in terms of some external candidates, the man I actually predicted to manage Wicklow if McConville left was actually Tony McEntee. I thought maybe they'd get another Armagh man in charge. But look, it isn't going to happen. McConville's going to stay unless McConville somehow does a bit of a Mickey Graham and, you know, backtracks on his words. But I don't think he'll do that. I think McConville will stay. And look, he's confirmed to stay. So. But anyway, lads, that is going to be the end of the video. Do let me know your thoughts, your opinions in the comments down below. Let me know as well some of your managerial predictions. What have you thought of the managerial merry-go-round as well? And hopefully, by the time this video is edited and uploaded, we don't have any more news that breaks. But look, there probably will be because the situation is so ever-changing. And yeah, mad to think. I mean, 10 counties already, I think, it's 11 counties, maybe even 12 counties that need managers already. And, you know, the season isn't even done. You know, there could potentially be some dropouts after the semis. Who knows? So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But look, they're going to be my sort of managerial merry-go-round predictions. Let me know yours in the comments down below. If you are new around here, hit the like button and subscribe if you could. And we'll see you all later.